Hi there, my name is Josephine, and I'm here to teach you how to save lives with a smartphone. It's a pretty ambitious statement, but stick with me, I'll walk you through it. We'll go step by step. First, a little bit of intro, a background on who I am. So I have completed my undergraduate in biomedical engineering at UCL, and then I went on to do a self-directed master's. Self-directed just means I didn't pick one of the projects available, came up with my own thing. The reason I did that was because in my second year, I stumbled onto a big lab full of very expensive medical equipment called calorimetry machines. These are basically very, very precise measurements of the color of a particular surface. It's needed for a lot of diagnostic tools. And I said to my professor at the time, I bet you this could be done on a smartphone. He turned around to me and said, no, it can't. Otherwise, we wouldn't be paying up to £1 million for a calorimetry machine. And of course, the only logical thing I could do at that point was spend the next 3 years of my life proving him wrong. This started with a 6-week internship where I put together a rough proof of concept. But once I saw that it was possible, there was no stopping me. I did a complete master's on it and put together this app. What I managed to do was learn a fair bit about app development, quite a lot about medical laws, and a little bit about diagnostic techniques. What I'm now trying to do is teach myself some cybersecurity stuff, just the basics. And I'm really, really enjoying that, looking to learn more. So in this presentation, I'm going to walk you through the ins and outs, the real technical stuff behind this app, in the vague hope that someone out there could help me progress my knowledge on the cybersecurity side of things. Now, as I started my journey into cybersecurity, the first thing I learned, and something that you guys should all be very familiar with, is that the best way to tackle a problem is understand the threat you're facing. Now, the threat here is neonatal jaundice. That's a medical term that basically means neonatal, affecting a baby, and jaundice. Jaundice is a bit more complicated, so we're going to need a new slide. Jaundice is a term used to describe the yellowing of the skin and the whites of the eyes. It's caused by a buildup of a waste product called bilirubin. It's this yellow-orange bile that's produced when your body breaks down red blood cells that it no longer needs. Now, usually bilirubin's not a big problem. It's produced by our body all the time. It's filtered out like any other waste product. But it's a very delicate balance, just like all biology is. And when that balance is disrupted, and this can happen in a whole lot of different ways, bilirubin builds up in your bloodstream. At high levels, it can cause abdominal pain, fever, weakness, fatigue. And if it passes through the blood-brain barrier, it can cause more serious disabilities and even death. It's definitely something we're trying to avoid. And it's a really common problem as well. It affects up to 80% of premature births and up to 60% of full-term births. It's really serious. It causes 114,000 infant deaths every year. So why haven't we all heard of it? Well, that's because while difficult to prevent, with early diagnosis, jaundice can be easily treated. Milder cases can be treated using phototherapy, which is basically just exposure to UV light and oxygen. And more severe cases can be treated using a process called exchange transfusion, which is really just a complicated blood transfusion. If it's so treatable then, why are we still seeing so many deaths? The clue is in where these deaths are occurring. 3/4 of them happen in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. It's worse in this region for a whole number of different factors, but the two main are an increased likelihood of certain genetic risk factors like G6PD deficiency and the difficulty in diagnosing in this region. Traditional methods include visual inspection, which is basically looking at an infant and seeing if there's any yellowing to the skin. And this is much more difficult in infants with darker skin tones. It's just more difficult to detect a yellowing of the skin in darker skin. And that's the current standard practice. What we need is a reliable, low-cost screening solution which works regardless of skin tone. So what are the options? There are lots of different diagnostic techniques. The gold standard and what would happen in a UK hospital is if a baby is suspected of having jaundice, they are given a blood test. This determines the concentration of that chemical bilirubin in their blood. This is gold standard diagnostic technique, but it's just not feasible for many people. It requires expensive medical equipment and an invasive procedure, a blood test that a lot of parents are really wary about. Plus, that equipment needs to be stored in a hospital. It's not very transportable. Current alternative diagnostic techniques are no better. We have that skin tone testing. You can see in this image here, we use a reference strip to compare the yellowness of the skin tone to reference squares. And this is much more difficult in infants with darker skin tones. The other main alternative is scleral testing. The sclera is the white of your eye. And this is a pretty consistent color across babies of all skin tones. So we look at that to measure yellowing in the white of the eye. This is mainly done using those really expensive colorimetry machines that I mentioned earlier. So I thought, what if we could do all of this using a smartphone? Wouldn't that be neat? In theory, yes. The theory here is to build an app which uses 2 images of the whites of the eyes to screen for neonatal jaundice. This has only recently become a possibility due to the evolution of 2 things. Firstly, the smartphones that we put into the smartphone cameras that we have now in modern smartphones. The sensitivity has just increased massively over recent years. And also the technology in the phone. We need a high level of processing power to be running this kind of analysis. And that has only recently become possible. I mentioned a pair of images here. There's a flash and a non-flash image. The reason we need to do this is because, as I'm sure you'll all be familiar with, if you sit under a blue light, everything around you starts to look blue. If you sit under a yellow light, everything will start to look yellow. That's the effect of ambient lighting, which can look really cool, but unfortunately isn't the best for accurate diagnosis. We need to get rid of this effect altogether. And we do that using subtraction methodology. So we take a picture with flash on, a picture with flash off, we subtract the values of one from the other. So what we're left with is a composite image made only of the light that is collected from the flash itself. The ambient light, therefore, has no impact. It's just the flash, which we know because we can control for that. We know exactly what the flash is on all the different phones, the color, the temperature, all of those things. This means that the app, in theory, can be used anywhere. It can be used outside, in a hospital, under home lighting. It's really flexible and doesn't need to be done in a particular environment. I'd like to take a brief moment here to say I didn't do this on my own. This app was built around the amazing science put out by DJAM, that's Detecting Jaundice in African Newborns, a UCL research group, but it's also contributed to by academics all over the world. In fact, this app is supported by a number of different charitable organizations. I put them up on screen here, and I really, really, really appreciate their help and support through all of this. They have been amazing. Not only did we have academics and charitable institutions, we also had contact with amazing medical staff. Here I've put 2 up, I'd just like to shout them out, Dr. Christabel and Dr. Judith. Dr. Christabel is an associate professor of pediatrics at the Ghana School of Medicine and Dentistry, and she's a consultant pediatrician at Accra General Hospital. Dr. Judith is the consultant neonatologist working at University College London Hospital. Along with them and their entire team of neonatal care and the midwives and the community healthcare nurses, we had fantastic input on this app, and they were involved through every step of the process. But what that meant is we focused on user-driven development. We didn't want to build something that just worked for us. We wanted to build something that worked for the people who were actually going to use this app. When I mentioned earlier, I did that 6-week prototype. I put together an app which I thought was the best. It was highly customizable. It had all of these different features. It could be used to diagnose a range of conditions, and it had great feedback. So with every step, you had a click or a snap, so you knew exactly what was going on. I showed this to a bunch of midwives and nurses and community healthcare workers, and they all said, it's great, but get rid of the sound. It massively disturbs the infants. If you're trying to take a picture and you make a click noise, they blink, they move, they're trying to hit the camera because they think it's a toy, make it silent. So I did. They also wanted something way more simple than what I'd put together. This is because they're dealing with a baby. And I don't know if you've ever interacted with a baby, they move a lot. And trying to take a clear image of the eye of a baby is really difficult. They need the app to be as simple as possible to help with this process. So we know vaguely what we want. Let's design it. This is user interface development, which is driven by the users. So it's got intuitive design and minimal use of language. That's what they told me were the top priorities. We don't want to read things. We just want to be able to go through the app as simply as possible. It needs to be intuitive because no one has time to be sitting down for a training session. They've got lives to save. Very valid. I can work with that. So we broke the app down into 4 main stages. First, the camera. This is a full screen display of what you're looking at through the camera. So you can just focus on centering the image, getting the right bits in. It's got a small counter at the top. You can see it's currently on 0. That clicks up every time you take an image. So you can see how many you've taken in that session. There is a large camera button that is just click once, take a picture. No more fuss than that, really simple. And a little check mark when you're done taking images so you can move on to the next stage. This is what it looks like. That's not a real baby, but it is how the app would work in real life. After that, you're shown this screen. Now, this can look a little confusing, so I'll walk you through it. What you're seeing here is actually two images, one on top of the other. Kind of looks like that in real life. And a square in the middle. It's clearer on the screen. So that yellow square you see in the middle is the sample area. The reason we're showing you two images is because we display both the flash and the non-flash image so that you can see if there's an issue with either image. If the baby has blinked, moved, the image is blurry, there wasn't enough light, then you can just delete that pair of images. Not a problem, just click that delete button. What you want to do is zoom and pan those images to create a sample. Now, it's quite difficult to fill an entire camera screen with just the white of the eye of a baby. That's a really small area. Usually you get some face, you get some eyelid, you get some hair. So what we needed to do was create a sample of that image because we just want to look at the color of the white of the eye. This is my face in the example image and a color testing machine, which you wouldn't need. So you zoom in using an intuitive pinch to zoom technique, and then just a drag to pan to center that little square you see in the middle over an area that is entirely the white of the eye. That's all we're interested in here. So once you get the sample area in the right place, and it's not obstructed by any veins going through the eye or any shadows or any eyelashes, you click the plus, the check mark to proceed on. And then we only look at that tiny square as moving forward. Once you've done that, and you've done it a few times because this is science and we love to average things, you move on to the results screen. That's going to pop out a result for an SCB, which is just a bilirometer reading and a diagnosis, because we want to make this simple for the end users. So it's going to say, does this baby need further investigation for jaundice? Yes or no, and a confidence reading, so that people can feel confident in the output of this app. Now, as a research project, we need slightly more than that. So we've also got an advanced results screen. This is just for the researchers. It's going to show you all of the different specs through the app so that we can test how well it's working. So now we've designed it, that's pretty much it. Nope, got to build it. We decided to use an Android interface because you have way more control over the camera. They've got this handy Camera 2 API, which is a fairly recent release. It's an application programming interface. It's basically a framework, a bunch of functions programmers can use to build their own apps. The Camera 2 is one of the most advanced in terms of the level of control it gives you over the functions of the smartphone camera. You can control things like the white balance, the exposure rating, the time it takes to take a picture, all of that. Unfortunately, it doesn't give us quite enough control. This camera capture session is the biggest issue here. When you take an image, it's converted from RAW into JPEG. It sounds a bit confusing, let me break down. This is what the inside of your camera looks like. Not exactly. Technically, this is a scientific representation of the process, but that is nearly as exciting. It's a Bayer matrix. It is a series of light sensors, blue, green, and red, laid out in a grid. 4 of these together, a little square, forms a pixel. That's the basic component of an image. It's an average of the blue, green, and red color readings. You can see that there's twice as many green as any other color. That's because the human eye is very, very sensitive to green light, and it's the most important to making an image look good. When you take a picture, raw image data is captured from these light sensors, and then it's converted into an image. If you just displayed the data coming in, it's going to look really green because it's weighted towards green, and also just not very nice to look at. It's got blank pixels and masked pixels, which are around the edge. They don't capture any light. They're just there to show the edge of the image, and it wouldn't be adjusted for anything like white balance. Unfortunately, we are trying to build a medical device, not a camera to display pretty images. So we need the actual raw image data. This is really difficult to get a hold of. There is no standardized format for raw sensor image data, and the format of these files can differ significantly between phone models. The differences include color filter arrangement, orientation, masked pixels, many other characteristics. Luckily, they will come with a header. That's a few bytes at the beginning of the file, which gives you this information if you can decode it. It's quite tricky. So we built a custom module to convert from raw sensor image data to a TIFF. That's a tagged image file format, a TIFF6 specifically, which is a standardized raw image format. Currently, this is only hard-coded for a couple of phone models, the Samsung S8 and the Nexus. But in future production, we hope that this can be widened to a whole range of different phones. This is what the app actually looks like in terms of a diagram of our interface. We built our own custom microservices architecture, really maintainable, very easy to test in different sections. And we put individual fragments, which are hosted on the main activity of the app. As you can see, the raw analysis section is quite significant. That's because it takes a lot of processing to get this image to where we need it to be. We subtract the image, we look at the sample area, we figure out the exact values coming in from all those different light sensors. We average it to get a color reading in RGB and also an XYZ chromaticity reading. And then we compare that using a brilliant algorithm designed by the DJAN team to various different color specs for how yellow is the eye. Is there a level of bilirubin there? Does this child have jaundice? Of course, you have to calibrate this kind of app. Every camera is completely different and every flash is different. Flash might be more yellow, more white, more blue. We need to calibrate. So we do that using these handy swatches. We know exactly what color these patches are, and we can measure that using the app and then compare the results that we're getting to the real result of the color. And this allows us to calibrate the app. Unfortunately, what this means is that the app can't just be sent out and downloaded onto people's phones. It needs to be calibrated, preferably in a dark room, an academic environment. And then the results need to be put into a calibration algorithm. We currently have it written in MATLAB on a desktop computer and fed back into the phone to calibrate it for that individual phone's camera sensor. And that's not just model of phone, it's individual phone. We need this to be really, really accurate. That's something else that we're working on at the moment. Another thing is security. You can probably tell by the fact that this slide has come quite late on in the presentation. Security wasn't something we worked on from the beginning of the project. It's something we realized we needed later. That's never a good start. I want to give you a bit of a background on the situation that this app is being used in so you can understand the security problems we're facing. This app is being used on work phones, phones given out by the organizations that I mentioned earlier, and also personal phones belonging to community healthcare workers. These are amazing nurses, midwives, and general healthcare workers who go out into remote regions, regions that really struggle to access healthcare and perform basic medical treatment and diagnosis there. This means that they have very limited access to the internet, and they often aren't able to download the latest firmware and the latest patches, leaving them really vulnerable to cyber attacks. As well as that, we wanted to transmit the data back to a medical setting so it could be followed up on if any children needed further treatment. And our first couple of trials, we just sent unencrypted data straight over the internet to the hospital. Not ideal. It's really not ideal. So this is really vulnerable. It's also high priority data. It's medical data, very personal. It can't be changed. And it indicates people who are really emotionally vulnerable. They're going through something really scary. Their child has just been potentially diagnosed with jaundice, a condition that they know to be serious, and they're probably quite scared. That leaves them really vulnerable to being exploited by attackers and malicious actors. Besides the point, this is also a medical device. Medical software counts as a medical device in most countries around the world, and therefore it needs to pass medical device certification standards. These vary around the world. Up here, I've put 4 just basic laws from the UK, EU, and the US. In order for a medical device to be made available in a country, it has to be certified. We looked at all of the different certification standards around the world, and we found that the EU and UK procedures, which are still fairly similar, Brexit notwithstanding, and these are the strictest, right? So if you pass this certification, a lot of different countries will give you a head start in passing theirs. For example, in Ghana, you get to skip the first couple of steps in the certification process if you're already EU certified. Now, there's a lot of different specs for what a medical device has to go through to pass this certification in terms of accuracy, in terms of provable testing, but cybersecurity is a major component, especially for software. And we are just not passing those specs at the moment. Our data transfer solution, for example, is to just do it manually. We're just not sending it over the internet. We are keeping these phones 100% offline. All of the data is localized and not even connected to the internet. And we take the data manually back to a hospital and transfer it there. Great short-term solution, not a feasible long-term solution. Our other idea is to ask for help. If anyone out there has any experience in app security and wants to be generous and donate their time, I would love to learn more. My contact details are going to be up at the end of this slide. And yeah, reach out to me. Also, if you have any questions after this, feel free to reach out. I would really, really appreciate it. Let's talk about the testing we're doing currently. We are testing in 2 locations. We have tests ongoing in the UK, that's in UCLH, and tests going on in Accra in Ghana. These tests are currently taking place in hospitals because we need to be able to compare the results that we're getting to blood tests. That's the gold standard I mentioned earlier, to see how accurately we are able to predict the bilirubin levels in blood. This is the first stage of testing, and we just want to do a proof of concept, basically, again, to prove that this idea could work. It's a really, really exciting idea, but like all medical, the progress is slow in terms of proving that it's safe, effective, and accurate. Once we finish testing in these locations, we're going to be trying to pass through medical device certifications, put it out there as a medical device on the market. We're going to be expanding into other areas, taking it for field tests, testing it under a whole range of conditions, trying to improve the app at every step in the process, getting lots and lots of feedback from community medical workers on what they like about the app, what we could improve. And yeah, we're going to be taking it forward and hopefully saving a lot of lives. That's the idea. Thank you so much for listening to me today. I hope you've learned something from this talk, and I would love to get your questions. But if you have any questions afterwards, reach out to me. Here are my social media handles. I'm very approachable. Thank you so much.
So first, can I start by saying, wow? That's wow. Also a lot more than wow, but let's stick with wow for the moment. That was fantastic.
You just blew everybody away. In chat, oh my goodness, my Discord started blowing up. People were like, this is illegal to view this for free. Oh my goodness. So congrats. You have an amazing talk. We have lots of questions for you.
Perfect. Finished a bit early, so we've got time for them all.
Perfect. Exactly. Would you like to start us off, Atomic?
I can, indeed. So, you've been at this for a certain while. You said 3 years, yes?
Yep.
So you're starting, from an academic context and then progressing into, this massive context with a lot of different actors. How long does the development of such an app, especially with the whole certifications coming afterwards, usually take, like as an industry standard?
So it's a fairly recent thing that people are building medical apps that are going to be certified as medical devices. And also my circumstances were quite unusual. When I say 3 years, I started in my 2nd year in my spare time. This was a hobby. I did a summer studentship. And then I worked on it through my undergrad, in my free time with the help of some really supportive professors. And then I took it on full-time as a master's. It's still undergoing development now. I finished my master's last year, but obviously I didn't get it finished in that time. To finish an app like this usually takes about 5 years, and then certification can take anywhere up to 10. That's just because you need provable results, right? You need to be able to replicate those results over and over again. You need to be sure that this is accurate and that it's safe. Safety is less of an issue here because we're really just taking pictures. It's not an invasive medical procedure, so that's easier.
Awesome. All right. We have so many questions for you still. Let's see. Does the app work on eyes of all ages, even though it's specified for babies, or would that require a different process?
So the app would be the same. And actually, we're looking at expanding this app to other conditions as well, like anemia. But the algorithm used to convert that color result into a bilirubin reading changes. Your eyes actually become slightly more opaque as you age. And so the yellow shows up slightly differently. So yeah, the app in itself would work absolutely fine. It would be the same, but we would need to change the algorithm within it, which isn't my job. I'm more of an engineer, less the scientist, but the brilliant people at UCL and at DGen, would be able to put together an algorithm that does that. Maybe that's something to look into in the future.
Definitely.
And would you like to take the next one, Atomic?
Yeah. Continuing on, okay, so you mentioned a lot of, variety of phones and that you need to tweak the camera output every time. And also this being the case with personal phones, you have sponsors and organizations helping you out, like distributing phones, etc. So you have a certain baseline. But in, let's say, countries that don't have access necessarily to all these medical devices or even smartphones of, let's say, modern smartphones with like high quality cameras, do you think that you'll be able to help provide this and like usher an age of like medical devices as smartphones? with that?
So that's actually the main concept of this project. When I say the smartphones have progressed to a level where we can do this, I don't just mean the latest cutting edge. I mean, actually, about 5 years ago, it was possible. Oh. Smartphones we were using to test this project were a Samsung S8 and a Nexus 5, which is quite a few years old. So the concept that we want to move forward with is actually a donation program, looking at secondhand smartphones. So we would collect these available secondhand smartphones. It would have to be a certain spec because the camera does have to be of a certain level and it does have to have enough processing power. But people could donate their old smartphones and then we could ship them out around the world with this app on them and provide them to community healthcare workers there. This is also a really expanding industry, as I mentioned. So we would hope that other medical device applications could then be downloaded onto that phone as well. And it would become just a general tool that they could use in their community healthcare work.
Okay, fantastic.
Awesome. And are you planning to add features such as reporting color glitches to make sure the client can interact with the app to provide feedback?
Yes. So as I mentioned, this is going to be a really iterative process. At least for the next 20 years, right? We're going to be getting feedback and we love feedback. And we work with a lot of people on the ground with our prototypes and also in our field testing. So there's, a whole lot of feedback features. We're asking people to fill out surveys and quizzes, and eventually there will be a reporting feature built into the app. At the moment, it's a bit unnecessary because everything is being reported. So anything would come up in that process.
Yeah.
So we came back to well, we talked about glitches, but there's also, on various smartphones, you have screens that don't have the same color setting or color depth. Is that something that might have an effect since you're also, trying to pan to an area that has, indicators
of... Yeah. So it wouldn't matter as much because we're not taking the reading off the screen. We're taking the reading off that raw image data. And all we really need you to select is a clear section of the eye that's all the same color. So no matter what color that appears on your screen, as long as it hasn't got an obvious vein running through it, and you're not looking at the iris, that's the colored part of your eye, just want the sclera, just the white. As long as you select that area, should be absolutely fine. Doesn't matter what color you're seeing it as, we'll have the accurate color data from that raw image.
Alrighty.
Awesome.
And do you believe automation could be useful for data transfer? If yes, do you have any requirements or prereqs for this for people who might want to help out with it?
That is a really interesting question. Yes, is the basic answer. But as I said, it's something I'm still learning about myself. So I believe it could be really useful. We did look into all sorts of automation for this app. We're trying to keep it fairly simple at the moment, just because we want it to be reliable and easy to understand, easy to fix in the field, to make adjustments. But yes, automation could be really useful for data transfer. Do I have any specs? Not off the top of my head. Feel free to reach out to me and we can talk more in detail about that. But yeah, certainly something we're interested in.
Alrighty.
Right.
Well, we have one more question for you.
Let's do one more.
How often do you see attacks from threat actors on medtech? Do you believe there's a lot of awareness around this subject, or do you think it's not as talked about as it needs to be?
Great question. We see them all the time. It's a super big problem, especially in different communities around the world where cybersecurity is slightly less of a priority, perhaps. This data is really, really, really valuable, right? Like it's really personal data. People don't want it out there. And it's really vulnerable to things like blackmailing schemes, especially diagnosis information, people's personal medical history. So it's a really high priority for a lot of malicious actors. And as I said, in some areas, the cybersecurity is slightly lacking. So yeah, we see it all the time. We had a couple of years ago, a really significant man-in-the-middle attack going on for a sort of similar project, and when they were looking at heart monitoring solutions. And the results of that can be really devastating. So yeah, I would say it's definitely more common than people think it is. It needs to be talked about more. We need to get more collaboration between the communities, the medical device community and cybersecurity. It needs to become more of a priority, definitely. Hoping that by doing this talk, I'm contributing a tiny bit to that. But yeah, I would love you guys to talk about it more. Go out, test all your medical devices. Don't hack into them necessarily, but yeah, it's something to be aware of.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was such a fantastic presentation. Thank you for coming out and doing this with us and being part of this and presenting all of this. We really appreciate it.
No, thank you guys. This has been a fantastic experience and I've really enjoyed it.
We did too.
Yeah. So to everyone else, we'll be back in a few short minutes. So yeah.